And we're back in the car on a Tuesday like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your early Tuesday evening here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Well, dear viewers, faithful listeners, today marks 30 years since the release of a movie that had a pretty big build-up back in the still somewhat pre-internet era. It was based off of a massively successful video game, which I played, spoiler alert, in old school stand-up arcades such as Time Out in Massapequa at the fabled and now almost completely eradicated Sunrise Mall, which I spent so much time in. Saw a lot of movies there, but not this one. And just as a fan of video games growing up, not so much anymore, but as a video game kid who started with, believe it or not, the Atari 800 in 1983 when I was 9, and that was not a particularly great computer, but the games were pretty good for the era. But from a conceptual standpoint, as someone who, at the time of 30 years ago, had just finished his second semester at New York University Film School, Cinema Studies Department, I was particularly interested in video game to movie adaptations and sometimes vice versa. So on this day, 1995 saw the release of a movie that I knew I was going to see, and I hoped and prayed that it was going to at least be serviceable, because the odds were it was going to be awful. Didn't have a director I recognized. The cast was, some people I liked, but not exactly A-listers, no offense. I just hoped for an entertaining movie, and lo and behold, against all odds, as Phil Collins sang, against all odds, the film pulled it off. And not only was it an entertaining film, it grossed more than 6 times its production and marketing cost, and it did not get great reviews, but it was not trashed by critics. And right now, if you were to go on Rotten Tomatoes, this film is at 47%. Not a very good score, but that's 3 times the score of a lot of Sylvester Stallone guilty pleasure movies, such as Get Carter, such as The Specialist. On this day, 1995, the movie adaptation of the massively successful video game Mortal Kombat opened in theaters. Now, even though I had video game systems circa 1995, I had an old school Sega Genesis, and there were a couple of games on that system that I thought would have been interesting to make into a movie, even if it was just like a direct-to-video film. There was a game that I was very proficient at in that era called Comic Zone. C-O-M-I-X, Comics Zone. And I thought that would have made a really good movie, but I know Hollywood had, they optioned the material, but they weren't able to get it going. That was an interesting concept in the game, the playability. It had like a Smash Brothers concept where you more or less just beat the shit out of everybody. You had to mash the buttons correctly. That was definitely a top 5 most fun games to play, Comic Zone. But even looking back at it now, like Lara Croft and certain other video game adaptations, Paul W.S. Anderson, the somewhat notorious filmmaker, he directed a number of adaptations. You had the adaptation of Doom with The Rock 20-some years ago. It is very difficult if the source material is not enough for a movie and you have to go into all kinds of different directions. But then there were these situations where they took a movie and turned it into a video game. And another notorious video game, but not for the same reason, a notorious video game was the video game which came out at the time of the movie, the Arnold Schwarzenegger version, not the Colin Farrell. I don't think there was ever a video game, but there was a Nintendo NES, old school, the first console, video game adaptation of Paul Verhoeven's Arnold Schwarzenegger starrer, Total Recall, which was based on the book by Philip K. Dick. And you remember the name of the book, right? We can remember it for you wholesale. But what I can remember for you wholesale is that the video game version of Total Recall sucked. It was like no better than a 2 out of 10. It was marginally fun. It kind of followed the plot of the movie, which is what you would normally want, but most of the most of the gameplay was very ragged, and it almost felt like you were playing on a Commodore 64 from years earlier. It did not have any fluid or dynamic gameplay. It was just mostly a shoot 'em up, and the Arnold Schwarzenegger character of Doug Quaid, like the graphics even sucked. It was just all bad. But Mortal Kombat was the kind of game, it was endlessly replayable. It had as much of a fun factor as other big video games that I enjoyed of the era. There was a game the previous year, because I think Mortal Kombat came out early 1992, but there was a game the previous year called Mad Dog McCree, which was a stand-up shooter where you had like a make-believe plastic gun, but when you shot at the screen, it was kind of photorealistic and accurate. And that was a very, very entertaining game. I spent many a $20 roll of quarters on that particular game. But Mortal Kombat, though, if you started to memorize the patterns and you memorized various sequences of moves, it was a game where you could play for a while on one quarter, or on one play, I should say, because sometimes a play was $1 or 50 cents. But when I first started, 25 cents, excuse me, I think you could still play this game for a quarter. But there was this one thing that the game did that was different, where each player, whether you played as Liu Kang or Sub-Zero or Kano or Johnny Cage or Sonya Blade or Raiden, you had a sequence of button mashes that you could engage, which would result in you not just winning the match, but literally murdering, fucking murder, death, kill, speaking of another sci-fi film from a few years earlier, Demolition Man, but you would murder, death, kill your opponent. And the voice of the game, whoever was on the soundtrack, would say, fatality. And if you were to not get hit during the game, you didn't get hit, and then you engineered the kind of killing blow, whatever it is, flawless victory. To hear the voice go flawless victory and then fatality, for someone who at the time was 18 going on 19, that was really cool. Although I would, understand this game is really not sending a very good message to anybody. You're literally trying to not just defeat your opponent, you're trying to murder, death, kill your opponent. You're trying to fatality your opponent. But I remember reading about Mortal Kombat, the movie version, and I did recognize two of the actors. I didn't recognize the name of one of them. Shang Tsung, that's kind of the big bad of the game, was played by an actor, I think his name is Cary Tagawa, and he had been in a number of films in the early 90s. And speaking of another huge literary adaptation, Michael Crichton's Rising Sun, I think it was Crichton. I'm sorry if I got that wrong. I think it was Crichton. But the adaptation of Rising Sun with a big cast, you had Wesley Snipes, who was still on the A-list, and Sean Connery, who was never not on the A-list, playing two cops in LA trying to solve a murder. And Cary Tagawa plays, this was one of those, they did this a lot in the 90s, where you had a character set up as the antagonist, and then it turns out, well, he's not really the antagonist, he's okay. And so he played that role in Rising Sun, and he was very good, I thought, in that film. So he plays the big bad of Shang Tsung in this movie. And one thing I enjoyed is that the character of Raiden from the video game, he's a little bit of a Thor character, not as powerful, but he has the powers of lightning. All you would need is to give him Mjolnir and he could be Thor, I guess. But the character of Raiden is not an active participant in the Mortal Kombat competition in the world of the film. He's like the good guy's mentor, and he sort of shows them the ropes and bails them out of a number of jams, because he is mega powered, whereas they have normal level strengths and weaknesses. So Raiden is played by Christopher Lambert, an actor that I was familiar with from Highlander, which is, spoiler alert, it's not good. The 1986 Highlander, it's not good. And Highlander 2, The Quickening, worse. And I know they're talking about, or they're doing another one right now. No thank you, I'm all set here. No interest whatsoever. But Christopher Lambert was in that, and he was also in The Sicilian, a not terribly successful adaptation of a Mario Puzo novel, which many people thought was at least reasonably on par with The Godfather. It's a sort of an epic. It's an epic in the vein of The Godfather. And I think then Puzo's last big novel was Omerta. He wrote a lot of books within that kind of range and realm and within that genre. But seeing Christopher Lambert's name, I said, okay, well, at least there's a little bit of, I like him, even if I didn't like those movies. And former Miss, I think she was Miss Teen USA, Bridget Wilson, who starred or co-starred in Last Action Hero as Arnold Schwarzenegger's daughter, Whitney. I saw that she was cast in Mortal Kombat. And the actress Talisa Soto, who played a Bond girl, and I thought did a heck of a job in the second and unfortunately final Timothy Dalton Bond, License to Kill. She was cast, I don't remember. I don't think she was Sonya Blade. I think Sonya Blade was played by Bridget Wilson. You know what? I'm getting my characters mixed up. But Talisa Soto was in the cast. Bridget Wilson was in the cast. And then an actor I wasn't familiar with played, the kind of ugly American Johnny Cage. But I honestly believe the film was going to be horrendous. It was just going to be catastrophically bad. But I decided if the film, and this is ridiculous, if the film was screened for critics, this is something that is not as big a deal now, but back then in the mostly pre-internet era, this was a big deal. When a film was not screened for critics, in almost all instances, it meant it was horrendous. That they weren't even going to bother, and they were just hoping to get fannies in seats on opening weekend without the film, seeing the film get trashed. Well, Mortal Kombat was screened for critics, and I saw that. And even though Newsday gave it 1.5 stars, I got enough of a good sense from the other newspapers that if you like the video game and if you're into this kind of story, it's probably going to work for you. This was the gist that I got out of it. So, despite the 1.5 stars from Newsday, and I don't know if Siskel and Ebert reviewed it, that week's show hadn't aired, at least not to my knowledge. I went to see it, and I saw it at the Lowe's, the Levittown Metroplex, a theater which I think doesn't exist anymore. But I saw a lot of big movies there. My dad and I saw The Firm there. I saw Disclosure there. What the heck? What else did I see there? Speechless in the same era with Michael Keaton and Gina Davis, a kind of unusual romantic comedy. So I decided, okay. Oh, and Seven. I saw Seven there. Man, what a fucking bruiser of a movie. And Boys on the Side. That was another one from 1995 that I saw there. But the movie worked. And I was hoping for it to be like a 2.5 stars out of 4, but I would actually have gone a little bit higher. I would have said 3 stars out of 4. And one reason why the movie to me worked is that Lyndon Ashby's Johnny Cage, they did a good job giving him enough to do and enough passably effective wisecracks where I really felt like it was a better performance than that role could have had and still succeeded. But you could tell that Lyndon Ashby was kind of going somewhere. He ended up being a pretty successful sitcom. He was in soap operas, and I think he had a couple of network TV shows later in the decade. And I feel like he played a supporting role, not in Diagnosis Murder, but a show like Diagnosis Murder, like he was a big TV star. And I really liked his performance. And he had one moment in the film. It was the biggest laugh in the theater. It was an early afternoon screening, if memory serves, and the theater was probably about 3/4 full, which was good. It meant, it meant the film was most likely going to be a hit. If on a random Friday at 2 p.m. you have a 3/4 filled theater, and if the movie was playing on 2 screens there, they were kind of crossing their fingers, I was confident it was going to be a hit. So he's going against a character called Goro, who is like 5 times the size. And yeah, the special effects, there were some CGI kind of effects, and most of there was some costuming. The character of Goro looks completely absurd in the world of the movie. But the way the film was shot, I kind of chuckled when I saw what Goro looked like. But you know what? I went with it. It was okay. But they gave the character of Johnny Cage one incredible moment where he's fighting Goro and he appears to be completely overmatched. But he has a moment where he just subtly gets the drop on Goro, and Goro doesn't realize it, but we as the audience do. And I think his sunglasses fell. Johnny Cage is always wearing sunglasses. That part originally was supposed to be played by Van Damme, but I don't really understand why they would cast Van Damme as an American. Like, they would have had to explain the accent. It wasn't needed, not for this movie, and I'm glad, because Van Damme he probably passed on it to do Sudden Death, which I still think is the best film he ever made. You got Die Hard on a Die Hard in a Die Hard with a Sudden Death, Die Hard in a sports arena, in particular Die Hard during Game 6 of the 1995 NHL Eastern Conference Finals. But Johnny Cage, Lyndon Ashby as Johnny Cage, has this moment where he all of a sudden has the drop on Goro. Goro, his sunglasses have broken, and he goes, "Those sunglasses cost $500, asshole." And he turns around and he puts Goro down. And it's not that it's such a great line, but it comes out of nowhere, and the way that Ashby delivers the line is a home run and just fantastic. Now, I guess the lead, if the closest we have to a lead, is Robin Shou, who plays Liu Kang. And Liu Kang was the character I typically played with when I played the stand-up video game, because for whatever reason, it seemed as if his moves were the easiest to control. And his kill thing was really not that terrible. He would land an uppercut, like a Mike Tyson punch, and the opponent would go 100 feet in the air, and he would die from crash landing. Like it wasn't a thing where you reached into his heart and ripped his chest out or electrocuted him to death. I felt like it was the most tame of all of the kill moves. And I don't know, I enjoyed his various maneuvers, so I played as that character. Now, right now, before I forget, Mortal Kombat 1995 is streaming on, it's once again called HBO Max. It used to be Max. It was HBO Max, then it was Max, and now it's HBO Max again. I have no idea. Somebody probably made a couple of $1 million because of those switcheroos. I would imagine it's all about the do-re-mi. But I like the progression of the story and the way it is set in a kind of surrealist, otherworldly, where you have characters who are from the real world now dealing with magical shit that they can't really explain. And the movie could make a joke out of it, but it doesn't. It takes it seriously, but also the fact that the character Raiden is super powered, it gives us a kind of a sense that all is not lost, because he might be more powerful than Shang Tsung, for all we know. And I didn't really like Christopher Lambert's affectation. I thought that he was a little bit overwrought with the way that he was, delivering his lines. I guess he didn't want to sound like the character from Highlander or the Sicilian. And also we're supposed to believe he is a god. So maybe I should be a little bit nicer when thinking of his performance. But I guess I was a little disappointed because Bridget Wilson didn't do very much with her character. Again, I can't remember if that's Sonya Blade. I think it is, but I'm trying to remember what the name of the Talisa Soto who she was playing. But Bridget Wilson gives a very tight and focused performance, and I feel like maybe she wasn't directed correctly, because, like, for example, in Last Action Hero, she's only in the movie for about 10 minutes, but she is very broad and hysterically funny. And I feel like they could have done more with her, given the fact that she showed the ability to not just play, oh, she's a really attractive girl, let her just read her lines. She showed that she could be funny as hell in her 10 minutes of screen time as Arnold's daughter in Last Action Hero. I think she's terrific. But this movie, I walked out of the theater feeling good, not just because the film had been entertaining, but they tried to make an entertaining movie, and I thought, some of the critics that trashed it were unfairly harsh. This was not going to be an Oscar winner, but it was good enough where people like me told friends, don't listen to the critics. And you know me, I'm a Roger Ebert guy, a David Denby guy from back in the day, Richard Corliss, Richard Schickel, Jamie Bernard in the Daily News, Lou Lemonick in the Post even more recently. I don't automatically say fuck the critics, because one of my career goals was to become a film critic. But this was a case where a lot of critics just were unfairly harsh. This movie is not for them. This film was for Generation Xers who played the video game and were just crossing their fingers to get a decent movie. And in a lesser vein, and I mentioned this on a recent podcast, how my understanding of how movies work and don't work, I thought that there was zero chance that next summer, 96, zero chance that Independence Day was going to be anything but catastrophically bad. I didn't think there was any way it was going to be better than Stargate, which was the previous film from Emmerich and Devlin. The fact that Independence Day so far exceeded expectations. I was praying for a Mortal Kombat style 2.5 stars out of 4. It's fun. You have a few laughs. The effects work is good. A little sword play. And that's what I was hoping for. And Independence Day to me is a 3 to 3.5 star out of 4. Mortal Kombat, I would give it 3 stars out of 4. And for people who maybe they weren't alive, if you're under 30, you weren't alive during the craze where people were still playing mostly stand-up video games, even though you had fantastic game systems in the early 90s, the TurboGrafx 16, as I say, the Sega Genesis, and some of the other ones that were that came out, the PlayStation. I don't know, the PlayStation might have already come out in the mid-90s. I don't know when the first Sony PlayStation, but the idea was people were still going to arcades, and not in a Dave and Buster's way. They were just going to arcades and putting in their 25 cents, putting in their $1 to play Mad Dog McCree. And this movie really hit the numbers, and it was not an accidental success. And if you ask, if you're a young person who has only seen the more recent one or recent, Mortal Kombat movies, if you ask people from ages 45 to 55, what did you think of the 1995 Mortal Kombat movie? They are almost all going to say it was way better than I expected. I thought it was going to be trash, and it's silly, it's campy, but it's better than it should be because they cast it really well, and the effects work is good enough. And really, sometimes you don't need to spend a ton on special effects, especially if you're creating a world via a special effect. And this film's off-kilter reality, the effects work not being James Cameron or Steven Spielberg level, it's suitable. It fits this film. And I have nothing but good things to say about the experience of seeing it that day. My feeling was that most of the people in attendance also, nobody asked for their money back. Nobody walked out during the screening. This is fucking trash. The video game was better. Yeah, okay, the video game was probably better. It's more fun to play a video game than watch a movie if you want to get into that. Speaking of Roger Ebert, that was something that he struggled with for the last 3 decades of his life. People are always telling him, Roger, you got to try video games. You'll love them. And he always resisted. He said, it can't be like a movie. It can't be like a movie. Well, it's not. It's a completely different experience. But when you plunk down your $4 in 1995 or $5 for a matinee, and you've got your popcorn, in my case, popcorn, Diet Coke, great combination. Popcorn with extra butter, if you want to call that butter. As my dear old dad, the biggest movie fan I've ever known, used to say, it's an insult to butter to call that shit butter. But I would have my big popcorn and my Diet Coke to stay hydrated when eating all of that salt and all the other preservatives and additives in there. I walked out of that theater being very satisfied, and I think I've seen it twice since then on various streaming. I haven't paid for it, but I do get HBO Max, and you know what? In its honor, maybe I'll fire it up tonight and at least watch a little bit, or maybe watch the kind of climactic fight sequences, which were really, I thought, well choreographed, well orchestrated, and pulled off with a certain aplomb. A-P-L-O-M-B. There's a word that you don't hear very much anymore. It should come back into vogue. And I like the very end, without spoiling it, the way it tells a full story, a self-contained story with a beginning, middle, and ending. And because it's based on a video game, it almost teases putting another quarter in and let's fucking go, let's do this again. So a happy 30th anniversary to the release of the 1995 adaptation of the early 90s classic, mega successful video game Mortal Kombat, released on this day, 1995, and the film starred Christopher Lambert, Bridget Wilson, Talisa Soto, Lyndon Ashby, Robin Shaw, Cary Tagawa, and I guess that's it. I always forget one or two people. Humble apologies. This has been episode 596 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Tuesday early evening here with me in New York. And if you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, peace.